Dr. Naomi Bennett, a talented African-American dermatologist, steps into her new role at Maple Grove Medical Center full of hope, but her journey is anything but smooth. From patients who refuse her care to colleagues who dismiss her expertise, Naomi faces skepticism and racial prejudice at every turn. The pressure to prove herself is relentless, and the weight of expectations threatens to pull her under. Yet Naomi refuses to back down. With every life she touches, like a young boy suffering from a rare skin condition or a firefighter scarred by burns, she begins to earn the respect of those around her. Through moments of life or death decisions, unexpected acts of kindness, and her unwavering determination, Naomi transforms the doubts surrounding her into admiration. Will Naomi rise above the challenges that test her resolve? Can her compassion and skill reshape perceptions and create a lasting legacy? The soft hum of Naomi Bennett's alarm clock pulled her from a restless sleep. Outside her apartment window, the Atlanta skyline glowed faintly in the early dawn. She sat up, the weight of anticipation heavy on her chest. Today was the start of her first day at Maple Grove Medical Center. After years of grueling study, endless nights in residency, and sacrifices she dared not count, Naomi was finally here. Yet, a knot of doubt coiled in her stomach. Her small apartment, barely decorated beyond essentials, reflected the life she had been living, functional and focused. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photo of her parents, their smiles warm and encouraging. Her mother's favorite saying echoed in her mind: "You belong in every room you walk into. Never forget that." By the time Naomi arrived at the hospital, the sun had risen, bathing the pristine glass facade of Maple Grove in golden light. The bustling energy of the hospital was both invigorating and intimidating. Dressed in her crisp white coat, she adjusted the name badge clipped to her pocket. Dr. Naomi Bennett, Dermatology. The title filled her with pride, yet she couldn't ignore the faint whispers of self-doubt. Inside the hospital, Naomi was met with a whirlwind of introductions. Dr. Matthew Hargrove, the head of dermatology, greeted her with a polite but distant handshake. "Welcome, Dr. Bennett. Your office is down the hall. Morning rounds begin at 8 sharp, he said, his tone more professional than warm. Naomi nodded, her confidence steady on the surface. But as she walked down the sterile corridors, she noticed the sidelong glances and whispered comments from a few colleagues. One young resident muttered to another, "She must be filling some diversity quota." The words stung, though Naomi pretended not to hear. Her first patient of the day, Mrs. Margaret Calloway, a woman in her 60s with rosacea, barely looked at her. "Are you sure you're a doctor?" Mrs. Calloway asked, her tone skeptical. "You look so young." Naomi smiled politely, responding with professionalism. But inside, her frustration simmered. She had faced this kind of questioning her entire career. By lunchtime, Naomi found herself retreating to the hospital's rooftop garden, a quiet space she hoped would offer solace. She leaned against the railing, watching the city below. The excitement of the morning had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of isolation. She thought of the sacrifices her parents had made to help her reach this point and wondered if it had been worth it. "Rough day already?" The voice startled Naomi. She turned to see James Walker, a nurse with kind eyes and a warm smile. He held 2 coffee cups, offering one to her. "Is it that obvious?" Naomi asked, hesitating before accepting the cup. "Let's just say I've seen that look before. First days can be tough," James replied, leaning against the railing beside her. "But you'll find your footing. Trust me, the patients and staff here, most of them, will come around." His kindness was unexpected, cutting through the heaviness Naomi had been carrying. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks, James. I'll hold you to that." The afternoon brought a new challenge. Naomi was asked to consult on a case involving a teenage boy with a severe and puzzling skin condition. His mother, visibly distressed, explained how other doctors had failed to help him. Naomi examined the boy carefully, asking detailed questions and taking extensive notes. Despite the pressure, she felt a spark of determination. Here was a chance to prove herself not just to others, but to herself. That evening, back in her apartment, Naomi sat at her small kitchen table, poring over medical journals and research articles. The case consumed her thoughts, pushing aside the doubts and whispers of the day. The boy's condition wasn't just a medical puzzle. It was an opportunity to show what she was capable of. Naomi's phone buzzed, breaking her focus. It was a text from her mother. "How was your first day, sweetheart?" She stared at the message, debating how much to share. After a moment, she typed back, "It was challenging, but I'll figure it out. Love you." Her mother's reply came quickly. "You always do. Love you too." Naomi leaned back in her chair, the weight of the day settling over her. She thought about James's kindness, the boy who needed her expertise, and her mother's unwavering belief in her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to give up. As she prepared for bed, Naomi glanced at the photo of her parents once more. "I belong here," she whispered to herself, the words both a declaration and a promise. The next morning, Naomi arrived early, her steps lighter than the day before. She carried the file for her young patient, Tyler Williams, under her arm. Hours of late-night research had given her a potential lead, a rare genetic condition that could explain his symptoms. Though untested, the theory filled her with hope. As she entered the dermatology wing, the hum of the hospital surrounded her. Doctors shuffled past, their conversations a blend of jargon and urgency. Naomi walked into the staff room for the morning meeting. The air was thick with coffee and anticipation as Dr. Hargrove went over the agenda. "Dr. Bennett," Hargrove said, his tone clipped as he glanced at her. "Have you completed the consult on the Williams case?" "Yes, Dr. Hargrove. I suspect his condition may be erythropoietic protoporphyria," Naomi said confidently. A pause followed. One of the senior residents, Dr. Peter Larson, raised an eyebrow. "That's an ambitious diagnosis," he said, his tone laced with skepticism. "Uncommon and unlikely in this case." Naomi held her ground. His photosensitivity, the lesions that worsen with sun exposure, and the elevated porphyrin levels in his preliminary tests all point to it. Dr. Larson chuckled lightly. "I hope you aren't rushing to conclusions, Dr. Bennett. It would be unfortunate to mislead the patient's family." The comment was met with a few murmurs around the table. Naomi's chest tightened, but she maintained her composure. "I'd like to run a porphyrin profile test to confirm. It's non-invasive and could provide definitive answers," she said, her voice steady. Dr. Hargrove nodded, though his expression remained neutral. "Proceed. Keep us updated." The meeting moved on, but Naomi couldn't shake the tension lingering in the air. It wasn't just Larson's dismissiveness, it was the subtle weight of being under constant scrutiny, of knowing that every move she made would be dissected more harshly than others. Later that day, Naomi visited Tyler and his mother in their hospital room. The boy, pale and frail, gave her a shy smile as she entered. His mother, Clara, looked up with weary eyes. "Good morning," Naomi said, her tone gentle. She pulled a chair beside the bed. "I've been reviewing Tyler's case, and I believe we may have an answer." Clara's face lit with cautious hope. "Really? What is it?" Naomi explained the suspected condition and the steps she wanted to take to confirm it. If this is the correct diagnosis, there are treatments that can help manage it and improve Tyler's quality of life. Clara reached for Naomi's hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett. No one's taken the time to look this closely before. I don't know how to thank you." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat. "We're in this together, Mrs. Williams. I'll do everything I can for Tyler." As she left the room, Naomi felt a flicker of pride. For all the resistance she faced, moments like this reminded her why she chose medicine. By mid-afternoon, Naomi was back in her office, reviewing lab results. The porphyrin profile test had been approved and would be conducted later that evening. She was deep in thought when James Walker appeared at her door. "Thought you might need a break," he said, holding out a granola bar. Naomi smiled, accepting the snack. "Thanks, James. You have a talent for showing up at the right time." "Comes with the territory," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "How's the Williams case going?" Naomi filled him in, her excitement evident as she described her findings. James listened intently, nodding in encouragement. "You're doing great work, Naomi," he said. "I know it's not easy, but people are noticing. Just give it time." His words, though simple, struck a chord. In a place where so many doubted her, James's belief in her abilities felt like a lifeline. That evening, Naomi stayed late to oversee Tyler's test. The hospital corridors grew quieter as the day shift gave way to the night crew. Naomi leaned against the wall outside the lab, exhaustion settling into her bones. She thought of her parents, imagining her father's voice saying, "Hard work never betrays you, sweetheart." The lab technician emerged with a nod. "Results will be ready by morning." Naomi thanked him, her heart heavy with anticipation. The next day brought mixed emotions. Tyler's test confirmed her diagnosis, a small victory, but the meeting to present her findings to the dermatology team proved more daunting. As Naomi explained the results, she noticed Larson's smirk and a dismissive shake of his head. "While your diagnosis is accurate, I wonder if it wasn't a bit lucky," Larson said, his words sharp. Naomi clenched her fists beneath the table, her calm exterior betraying none of her frustration. "With all due respect, Dr. Larson, this diagnosis wasn't luck. It was the result of thorough research and clinical judgment." Dr. Hargrove cleared his throat, cutting through the tension. "Enough. Dr. Bennett's work speaks for itself. Let's move forward with her treatment plan." The room fell silent, and Naomi felt a mix of relief and indignation. Even when she succeeded, it seemed there was always another battle to fight. Later that day, as Naomi walked past Tyler's room, she saw Clara through the glass, reading to her son. The sight warmed her heart, easing the day's frustrations. She tapped lightly on the door and stepped inside. "Dr. Bennett," Clara said, her voice brimming with gratitude. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Naomi crouched by Tyler's bed, meeting his tired but hopeful gaze. "You're a fighter, Tyler. We'll get through this together." As she left the room, Naomi felt a shift within herself. The road ahead would be difficult, but she wasn't walking it alone. Moments of kindness from Clara, from James reminded her that resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding strength in connection and purpose. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Naomi opened her journal and wrote one line: "Another step forward." The morning sun spilled through the blinds of Naomi's modest apartment as she reviewed Tyler Williams's treatment plan one last time. The weight of the previous days lingered, but Naomi felt a flicker of optimism. The treatment, a combination of beta-carotene supplements and rigorous sun protection, offered Tyler a chance at a more normal life. She couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and anticipation as she prepared for her rounds. When she arrived at the hospital, James greeted her with a warm smile at the nurse's station. "You're early. Big day?" "Hopefully," Naomi replied, holding up Tyler's file. "Today's the day we start Tyler's treatment." James nodded, his expression encouraging. "You've got this, Dr. Bennett. Just remember, one step at a time." The day began with the usual hustle of the dermatology wing. Patients filed in and out of exam rooms, charts exchanged hands, and the hum of hospital life carried on. Naomi's focus, however, remained on Tyler. By mid-morning, she found herself standing outside his room, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice warm as she greeted Clara and Tyler. Clara's face lit up with cautious hope, while Tyler offered a shy smile. "We're ready to begin treatment," Naomi said, pulling up a chair beside Tyler's bed. "This will take time, but if we follow the plan carefully, it should help reduce your symptoms." Clara reached for Naomi's hand, her gratitude evident. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett. You've done more for us in a few days than anyone else has in months." The words brought a lump to Naomi's throat. She thought of the sleepless nights, the doubts, the whispers of skepticism from colleagues. In that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the boy sitting before her, finally getting the care he deserved. The afternoon was a blur of activity as Naomi balanced her duties. She visited other patients, handled routine consultations, and participated in a brief staff meeting. The meeting, while uneventful, carried an undertone of change. Dr. Hargrove's approval of her treatment plan for Tyler seemed to shift the atmosphere, albeit subtly. Naomi noticed fewer sidelong glances and fewer interruptions when she spoke. As the day wound down, Naomi returned to check on Tyler. She found him sitting up in bed, a coloring book in his lap. Clara looked up from the chair beside him, her eyes bright with relief. "How are you feeling, Tyler?" Naomi asked. "Okay," he said, his voice soft. "Better, I think." Clara nodded. "He's been smiling more today. I haven't seen that in a while." Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. "That's a good sign. We'll keep monitoring him closely, but this is a great start." Later that evening, Naomi headed to the hospital's cafeteria for a quick dinner. She carried her tray to a corner table, ready to unwind, when she noticed Dr. Susan Collins, the experienced surgeon, waving her over. Susan was known for her no-nonsense demeanor, but her sharp mind and fair approach had earned her respect. Naomi hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Dr. Collins," she said, taking a seat across from the older woman. "Call me Susan," she said, her tone friendly. "I've been hearing about your work with the Williams case. Sounds like you've made quite an impression." Naomi blinked, surprised. "Thank you. It's been a team effort," Susan smirked. "Modesty is good, but don't downplay your role. I know how hard it is to get recognition in a place like this. You're doing good work, Naomi. Keep it up." The unexpected kindness from Susan caught Naomi off guard. She had grown so accustomed to skepticism that praise felt foreign. Still, it buoyed her spirits, reminding her that allies could be found in unexpected places. The next day, Naomi's routine began to shift. During morning rounds, Dr. Larson offered a begrudging acknowledgement of her diagnosis for Tyler. "The Williams case is progressing well," he said, his tone lacking its usual edge. While far from an apology, it was a small victory Naomi savored. More notably, her interactions with patients became more fulfilling. A young woman with chronic eczema, previously hesitant to trust Naomi, opened up during her follow-up visit. "You really listened," the woman said. "It makes a difference." The words stayed with Naomi as the day unfolded. Slowly but surely, she felt the walls around her begin to crack, not from confrontation, but from perseverance and quiet resilience. That evening, Naomi stood in the hospital's rooftop garden, the city lights twinkling in the distance. James joined her, his ever-present warmth a comforting presence. "Big day," he said, leaning on the railing beside her. Naomi nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "It feels like things are starting to change. Just a little." "They are," James said. "You're proving what you can do, one patient at a time, and people are noticing." Naomi let his words sink in. For the first time since she started at Maple Grove, she felt a glimmer of belonging. It wasn't just about earning respect, it was about knowing her own worth, regardless of what others thought. As she returned home that night, Naomi's exhaustion was tempered by a sense of purpose. She sat at her kitchen table, jotting notes in her journal. One line stood out as she closed the book. Every step mattered. Naomi woke to the familiar buzz of her alarm clock, her body heavy with fatigue. The progress she'd made with Tyler and the glimmers of recognition from her colleagues should have been encouraging. Yet, as she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that had crept in over the past few weeks. Her parents had always been her biggest cheerleaders, but with them miles away in South Carolina, she felt their absence keenly. Calls home helped, but they couldn't replace the warmth of their presence. She had no close friends in Atlanta yet, and the walls of her apartment seemed to close in on her more each night. Shaking off the melancholy, Naomi grabbed her coat and headed out. The city streets were alive with the energy of a new day, but Naomi felt out of sync with it all. At the hospital, Naomi was met with a whirlwind of activity. Tyler's progress was promising, and Clara's relief was palpable, but her workload seemed to double overnight. New consults poured in, each case presenting its own unique challenges. Naomi thrived under pressure, yet the unspoken scrutiny from some of her colleagues remained an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. Mid-morning, Dr. Susan Collins stopped by her office. "You're looking tired, Naomi," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Naomi offered a weak smile. "Just busy." Susan raised an eyebrow. "Busy is part of the job, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself." "That's an order." Naomi chuckled, appreciating Susan's concern. But the truth was, she wasn't sure how to slow down. The demands of her work left little room for anything else. Later that afternoon, Naomi met with a new patient, Grace Miller, a retired school teacher in her 70s. Grace's file noted a recurring rash with no clear cause. When Naomi walked into the room, Grace greeted her with a wide smile. "Well, aren't you a breath of fresh air?" Grace said, her voice warm and inviting. Naomi laughed softly. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. How can I help you today?" As they talked, Naomi couldn't help but be drawn to Grace's energy. Despite her condition, she radiated positivity, peppering their conversation with anecdotes about her years as a teacher. "You remind me of one of my brightest students," Grace said, as Naomi examined her skin. Determined, sharp, and carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Naomi paused, surprised by the comment. "What makes you say that?" Grace's eyes softened. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's pushing themselves too hard. You're doing amazing things, sweetheart, but don't forget to take a breath." The words stayed with Naomi long after their appointment ended. Grace's kindness, her ability to see beyond the surface, felt like a balm to Naomi's weary soul. That evening, Naomi lingered in her office, her notes for the day spread across her desk. James knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked, handing her a cup of tea. "Seems like the oil never runs out," Naomi replied with a tired smile. James pulled up a chair. "You know, Naomi, you don't have to carry it all on your own. You've got people in your corner." His words, like Grace's earlier, struck a chord. Naomi hesitated before speaking. "Sometimes it feels like I have to prove myself every single day. Like if I let up for even a moment, everything will fall apart." James nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it, but you're not alone in this. People are starting to see how incredible you are. Let them help you." For a moment, Naomi let the weight of his words settle. She thought of Susan's advice, of Grace's insight, and of James's unwavering support. Maybe she didn't have to fight every battle by herself. The next day, Naomi returned to Grace's room for a follow-up. The diagnosis, a mild allergic reaction to a skincare product, was simple, but Naomi lingered, drawn to Grace's warmth. As they talked, Grace reached for Naomi's hand. "You're going to do great things, Dr. Bennett, but remember, even great people need rest and support. Don't let this place dim your light." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Grace. That means more than you know." As she left the room, Naomi felt a small shift within herself. Grace's words, so full of wisdom and kindness, reminded her of the importance of balance. She couldn't be everything to everyone if she didn't first take care of herself. That evening, Naomi returned to her apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. She called her mother, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "How's my favorite doctor?" her mother asked. "Better," Naomi replied. "I had a patient today who reminded me of you. She said something that stuck with me about not letting this place dim my light." Her mother chuckled. "Smart woman. Sounds like she knows what she's talking about." Naomi laughed, the sound genuine for the first time in days. Before bed, she pulled out her journal and wrote, "Even the strongest need support. Find your balance." As she closed the book, Naomi felt a flicker of hope. The challenges weren't over, but she was beginning to see a path forward, one that allowed her to grow without losing herself. The hospital was unusually quiet for a Monday morning, as Naomi settled into her office. She had just reviewed her patient list for the day when a page came through the intercom. "Dr. Naomi Bennett, please report to Emergency Room 2. Naomi's pulse quickened. ER consults were rare for dermatology, typically involving urgent or complex skin-related issues. She grabbed her coat and rushed down the hall, her mind racing with possibilities. When she arrived, the scene was chaotic. A man in his early 40s lay on the gurney, his face swollen and red, his breathing labored. Nurses and ER doctors surrounded him, their movements hurried and precise. "What do we have?" Naomi asked, slipping into the room. Dr. Patel, an ER physician, gestured toward the patient. "We suspect anaphylaxis triggered by a severe skin reaction." He was gardening when it started. Hives, swelling, rapid onset, his airways compromised, and epi isn't enough. Naomi's eyes scanned the patient, noting the raised welts spreading across his arms and neck. Something about the pattern of his reaction struck her. It wasn't just a typical allergic response, it looked deeper, systemic. "Have you ruled out contact dermatitis or an environmental trigger?" she asked, stepping closer. "We're still investigating," Dr. Patel replied, "but his vitals are dropping fast. We need a solution now." Naomi felt the weight of the moment. The patient's life was slipping through their fingers, and the room's energy was thick with unspoken urgency. She glanced at the nurse monitoring the IV fluids. "What's his infusion rate?" "Normal saline at 125, the nurse replied. Naomi nodded. Her mind raced, piecing together the clues. The patient's symptoms pointed to a rare condition she'd read about during residency, an allergic reaction triggered by a photosensitizing agent. "What if this isn't just an allergy?" she said, her voice cutting through the room. "What if it's phytophotodermatitis exacerbated by sun exposure and an immune overreaction? The sap from certain plants can trigger this when combined with sunlight." Dr. Patel frowned. "It's a stretch." "It fits," Naomi said, her tone steady but urgent. "If I'm right, corticosteroids could reduce the inflammation enough to stabilize him." The hesitation in the room was palpable. Dr. Patel met Naomi's eyes. "You're sure about this?" "As sure as we can be right now," she said, "but we're out of time. Let me try." After a tense pause, Dr. Patel nodded. "Do it." Naomi instructed the nurse to administer a high dose of intravenous corticosteroids. The room held its breath as they monitored the patient's response. Minutes felt like hours, but slowly, the swelling began to subside. His breathing steadied, and the tension in the air gave way to cautious relief. "You did it," Dr. Patel said, his tone a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Naomi stepped back, her heart pounding. The reality of the moment sank in. She had made the right call, and it had saved a life. The incident rippled through the hospital by the afternoon. Naomi's decisive action became the talk of the staff, a testament to her expertise under pressure. Though some colleagues were quick to downplay the significance, "She got lucky," Dr. Larson remarked in passing. Others began to take notice. Dr. Hargrove stopped by Naomi's office later that day, his expression unreadable. "I heard about your work in the ER this morning," he said. "Impressive diagnosis." "Thank you," Naomi replied, her voice measured. Hargrove hesitated before adding, "Keep it up, Dr. Bennett. You're making a difference." Though brief, his words carried weight. For the first time, Naomi felt a shift in how she was perceived, not just as an outsider, but as a capable physician. That evening, Naomi found herself at the hospital's rooftop garden, a place that had become her sanctuary. The events of the day played over in her mind: the fear, the pressure, the triumph. James joined her, as he often did, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Word travels fast around here," he said, handing her a cup. "Your patient's doing much better thanks to you." Naomi smiled faintly. "It was a team effort." James tilted his head, giving her a knowing look. "You can be humble, but don't downplay what you did. That man's alive because of you, Naomi." She sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her. "I guess I still feel like I have to prove myself every day." "You've done more than prove yourself," James said. "People are starting to see you for who you are, a brilliant doctor. Don't let the doubters get in your head." Naomi nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing. James's unwavering support reminded her that she wasn't alone in this journey. The next day, Naomi checked on the ER patient, Mr. Carlson, who was now alert and recovering well. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice still raspy but filled with gratitude. "They told me you saved my life. Thank you." Naomi smiled, her heart swelling. "I'm glad I could help, Mr. Carlson. You'll be back to gardening in no time. Just stay away from the plants that caused this." Clara and Tyler also stopped by her office that afternoon. Tyler's skin was healing beautifully, his smile brighter than ever. "We wanted to thank you again," Clara said, holding out a small gift bag. Naomi opened it to find a handmade card from Tyler. Inside were the words, "Thank you for helping me feel normal again." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. "This means so much. Thank you, Tyler." As the day ended, Naomi reflected on how far she'd come. The whispers of doubt and skepticism still lingered in the background, but they felt quieter now, overshadowed by the voices of those who believed in her. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Courage is built in moments of uncertainty. Every step forward matters." Naomi closed the journal, her resolve stronger than ever. The road ahead was still challenging, but for the first time, she felt like she was truly finding her place not just in the hospital, but in her own skin. Naomi arrived at the hospital the next morning to find her office desk adorned with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a note. "Thank you for saving my husband's life, Mrs. Carlson." She smiled, touched by the gesture. The events of the past few days had left her feeling both invigorated and drained. Mr. Carlson's recovery was a victory, but the emotional toll of making life-and-death decisions lingered. As she slipped on her white coat and prepared for rounds, Naomi thought about the quiet moments of gratitude that had begun to fill her days. A mother's tearful thanks, a child's beaming smile, and now, a simple bouquet of flowers. These moments were a stark contrast to the skepticism and resistance she had faced when she first arrived. Naomi's morning was packed with follow-ups and consults. Patients now seemed more at ease with her, their initial doubts melting into trust. Even her colleagues had grown more amicable, if not openly supportive, at least less resistant. After finishing her last consultation of the morning, Naomi made her way to the cafeteria for a much-needed coffee. As she waited in line, she noticed Dr. Susan Collins at a nearby table, motioning for her to come over. Susan greeted her with a wry smile. "How does it feel to be the hospital's new hero?" Naomi laughed softly, shaking her head. "I wouldn't go that far." "Well, you should," Susan said, her tone warm but firm. "What you did in the ER wasn't just about skill. It was about guts. A lot of people would have frozen in your shoes." Naomi sipped her coffee, grateful for Susan's unwavering support. "I guess I've just learned to trust my instincts, but some days it still feels like an uphill battle." Susan leaned forward, her gaze steady. let me tell you something. When I started here, I was the first female surgeon in this hospital. Do you know how many times I was called nurse in my first year? Or how many times someone questioned my ability to lead an operation? Naomi's eyes widened. I had no idea. Susan nodded. You're walking a path I know all too well, Naomi. But the thing about paths is, they get smoother the more people walk them. You're paving the way for others, whether you realize it or not. The weight of Susan's words settled over Naomi. She hadn't thought of her journey in those terms before. To her, it had always been about proving herself. But Susan's perspective offered something new. Purpose beyond her own struggles. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge. A young girl named Ella, no more than 8 years old, had been referred to Naomi with a rare and disfiguring birthmark that covered part of her face. Ella's parents were eager for solutions but cautious, having faced judgment from others about their daughter's appearance. When Naomi entered the exam room, Ella sat quietly, her head down, refusing to meet her gaze. "Hi, Ella," Naomi said gently, crouching to her level. "I'm Dr. Bennett. I hear you're really brave." Ella peeked up at her, her eyes uncertain but curious. Naomi spent the next half hour talking to Ella and her parents, explaining treatment options with patience and empathy. By the end of the appointment, Ella had warmed to her, even offering a small smile. As they left, Ella's mother lingered behind. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're the first doctor who's treated her like a person, not a problem to solve." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "She's a special little girl. We'll take good care of her." Later that evening, Naomi found herself reflecting on the day in the hospital's rooftop garden. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and a cool breeze swept through the air. James appeared, as he often did, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You have a knack for finding me," Naomi said with a smile as she accepted the cup. "I like to think of it as excellent timing," James replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before James spoke again. "How's Ella doing?" Naomi sighed. "It's going to be a long journey for her, but she's strong, and her parents are incredible." James nodded. "It's amazing how much a kind word or a small gesture can mean to someone, especially when they've been through so much." Naomi thought of Susan's encouragement, Mrs. Carlson's flowers, and Ella's mother's quiet gratitude. Each act of kindness had left its mark, reminding her that the work she did was about more than diagnoses and treatments. The next morning, Naomi walked into her office to find a small package on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note from Ella, along with a drawing of Naomi wearing a superhero cape. The note read, "Thank you for being my hero." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. She placed the drawing on her desk, a reminder of why she had chosen this path. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, not just in the hospital, but in her purpose. The kindness of others had chipped away at her doubts, allowing her to see herself as they saw her, capable, compassionate, and deserving. That evening, Naomi wrote in her journal, "Kindness creates ripples. The smallest acts can change lives." She closed the book, her resolve renewed. The road ahead would still have challenges, but she now carried with her the strength of unexpected kindness and the courage to keep going. The following weeks brought a quiet shift in Naomi's life at Maple Grove Medical Center. The whispered doubts about her abilities began to fade, replaced by nods of acknowledgement and occasional words of praise from her colleagues. Patients who once hesitated to trust her now referred others to her care. Still, the road was far from smooth. Naomi's work on Ella's case continued to draw attention. The treatments were showing promising results, and Naomi had started to gain a reputation as a dermatologist who didn't shy away from complex or sensitive cases. Despite this progress, the weight of past challenges lingered, and she often found herself replaying moments of doubt in her mind. One morning, Naomi was called to consult on a new patient, Mr. Donnelly, a retired firefighter with severe scarring from third-degree burns sustained in the line of duty. His injuries extended across much of his chest and arms, and he had lived with the emotional and physical toll for over a decade. Mr. Donnelly sat stiffly in the exam room, his posture guarded. His wife, seated beside him, gently placed a hand on his knee. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice rough from years of smoke inhalation, "I'm not sure what you can do for me, but my wife insisted we come." Naomi smiled gently as she sat across from him. "First, let me thank you for your service. What you've endured tells me you're stronger than most." Mr. Donnelly's wife smiled, squeezing his hand. Naomi spent the next hour carefully examining his scars, explaining the advanced laser treatments and skin graft techniques that could improve his mobility and reduce the scar's appearance. Her compassion and confidence seemed to put him at ease. "It'll be a long road," Naomi said, meeting his eyes. "But if you're willing to try, I believe we can make a difference." For the first time, Mr. Donnelly's posture softened. "All right, Dr. Bennett," he said, "let's give it a shot." The case became Naomi's focus over the next several weeks. Mr. Donnelly's treatments were intricate and required collaboration with other departments, including plastic surgery and physical therapy. Naomi coordinated every step, ensuring he received the best care possible. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. During a department meeting, Dr. Hargrove praised her work, marking the first time he had openly acknowledged her contributions. "The progress on Mr. Donnelly's case has been remarkable," he said. "Dr. Bennett has shown exceptional dedication and expertise." Naomi felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. For so long, she had worked in the shadows of doubt, and now recognition was beginning to break through. One afternoon, as Naomi passed through the hospital lobby, she spotted Mr. Donnelly and his wife. He was walking with a more confident stride, his mobility improving thanks to the treatments and therapy. His wife waved her over. "Dr. Bennett," she called, her voice bright. "We were just talking about you." Naomi approached, smiling. "How's everything going?" Mr. Donnelly grinned. "Better than I expected. It's been tough, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. I didn't think that was possible." His wife nodded, her eyes shining. "You've given us hope. We can never thank you enough." Naomi felt a lump in her throat. "You've done the hard work, Mr. Donnelly. I'm just here to help." As she walked away, Naomi realized the depth of what her work meant, not just healing physical wounds, but helping people reclaim their lives. The ripple effects of her efforts extended beyond her patients. One afternoon, Dr. Larson approached Naomi in the hallway. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his tone more reserved than usual. "I wanted to say, I misjudged you. Your work with Mr. Donnelly and the Williams case has been impressive. I respect what you've done here." Naomi blinked, momentarily stunned. "Thank you, Dr. Larson," she said, her voice steady. Though she knew not everyone's biases could be erased, this moment felt like a milestone. Later that evening, Naomi sat in the rooftop garden with James, who had become her trusted confidant. "You're making waves, Naomi," he said, sipping his tea. "People are finally seeing what I've known all along." Naomi chuckled softly. "It's strange. For so long, I felt like I didn't belong here. And now, I don't know. Things are changing." James nodded. "You earned it, Naomi. Every bit of it." As they sat in companionable silence, Naomi reflected on her journey. The doubts, the struggles, the unexpected moments of kindness, they had all shaped her into the doctor she was becoming. That night, as she wrote in her journal, she penned a single line: "Respect isn't given, it's earned, one patient at a time." She closed the journal with a deep sense of fulfillment, ready to face whatever came next. The week began with a flurry of activity, and Naomi was busier than ever. Mr. Donnelly's progress had sparked a wave of referrals, and patients with complex dermatological conditions were being sent her way. Though the increased workload was demanding, Naomi embraced it. She had come to see each case not just as a challenge, but as an opportunity to make a difference. On Wednesday morning, Naomi arrived early to review the file of her latest patient, a middle-aged woman named Lydia Carter. Lydia was experiencing a severe reaction to a prescription cream for eczema. The reaction had caused blistering and open sores, leaving Lydia in immense pain and unable to perform basic daily tasks. Naomi examined the file carefully, her brow furrowing. Something about the symptoms didn't align with a typical allergic reaction. Determined to get to the root of the issue, Naomi ordered additional tests and scheduled a follow-up. By midday, the hospital was buzzing with news of an emergency. A scheduling error had caused a critical delay in the delivery of a treatment for one of Naomi's patients. The oversight left a young man with a severe case of Stevens-Johnson syndrome at risk for further complications. When Naomi heard the news, she immediately rushed to address the issue. In the staff meeting that followed, the blame quickly shifted in her direction. "It's Dr. Bennett's case," Dr. Larson said, his tone sharp. "This shouldn't have happened." Naomi stood, her voice calm but firm. "The error occurred during processing, not in the treatment plan I submitted. I've already escalated the matter and ensured the medication is en route." Her composure silenced the room. Dr. Hargrove nodded. "Let's focus on resolving the issue instead of assigning blame. Dr. Bennett, keep us updated." Though the meeting moved on, Naomi felt the sting of being singled out. As she returned to her office, her mind raced. No matter how far she had come, moments like this reminded her of the hurdles she still faced. That afternoon, Lydia's test results came back. They revealed an underlying autoimmune condition, one that had been overlooked in her initial diagnosis by another physician. The reaction to the cream wasn't an allergy, it was a symptom of the condition. Naomi immediately updated Lydia and crafted a new treatment plan. As she explained the findings, Lydia's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett," Lydia said, tears in her eyes. "You actually listened to me. I've been to so many doctors, and none of them figured this out." Naomi smiled. "It's what I'm here for. We'll work together to get this under control." Later that evening, Naomi sat in her office, reflecting on the day. The tension from the morning's meeting still lingered, but Lydia's gratitude reminded her why she persisted. As Naomi packed up her things, Susan Collins appeared in the doorway. "Busy day?" Susan asked, stepping inside. "You could say that," Naomi replied with a weary smile. Susan leaned against the desk. "I heard about the meeting this morning. You handled yourself well." Naomi nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's frustrating, though. No matter how much I prove myself, it feels like I'm still under a microscope." Susan's gaze softened. "That microscope will always be there, Naomi. But how you respond to it is what matters. Today, you stood tall, and people noticed. That's how you change perceptions, one moment at a time." The words resonated deeply. Naomi had spent so much of her career focusing on outcomes that she hadn't fully appreciated the power of her presence in the room. The next day, Naomi received an email from Dr. Hargrove commending her quick action on the Stevens-Johnson case. He acknowledged her leadership under pressure, a gesture that felt like a small but significant victory. As she walked through the hospital that afternoon, several staff members greeted her warmly. Even Dr. Larson offered a brief but genuine nod of respect. In Lydia's follow-up appointment, Naomi noticed a subtle shift. Lydia smiled more, her posture more relaxed. The new treatment plan was working, and her symptoms were improving. "You've given me hope," Lydia said as she prepared to leave. Naomi's heart swelled. "That's what we're here for." That evening, Naomi joined James in the rooftop garden. The city lights stretched out before them, a reminder of how far she had come. "You've been busy," James said, handing her a cup of tea. Naomi laughed softly. "Busy doesn't even begin to cover it." James grinned. "Well, from what I hear, you've been handling it all like a pro. People are starting to see you for who you really are, Naomi." Naomi looked out at the skyline, her thoughts turning to the challenges she had faced. Each moment of doubt, each whisper of criticism had shaped her into the person she was becoming. "I think I'm starting to see it too," she said, her voice quiet but steady. That night, Naomi wrote in her journal, "Strength isn't just about enduring, it's about standing tall, even when the odds are against you." As she closed the journal, she felt a sense of peace. The road was still long, but she was ready to walk it one step at a time. The first hint of autumn had settled over Atlanta, bringing cooler mornings and the scent of fallen leaves. Naomi arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, her mind buzzing with plans for the day. As she walked through the quiet corridors, she passed a bulletin board in the main lobby and noticed a flyer pinned to the center. Diversity and Inclusion Seminar. Keynote speaker, Dr. Naomi Bennett. Her breath caught. She had agreed to speak at the seminar weeks ago, but seeing her name in bold print made the reality of the event sink in. The seminar was set for tomorrow afternoon, and it would be her first time addressing such a large audience. She thought of all the challenges she had faced since starting at Maple Grove, the skepticism, the microaggressions, the constant need to prove herself. The idea of sharing her story was both empowering and terrifying. The day unfolded in its usual whirlwind of patience and paperwork. Naomi's schedule was packed, but she managed to find a moment of quiet reflection during her lunch break. As she sat in the staff lounge, James appeared, holding a tray of sandwiches. "I hear you're the star of tomorrow's seminar," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Naomi chuckled nervously. "Star might be a bit of an exaggeration." "Not from where I'm standing," James said. "You've got a lot to say, Naomi, and people need to hear it." Naomi hesitated. "What if it doesn't make a difference? What if they don't care?" James leaned forward, his gaze steady. "They'll care because it's you. Your story, your experiences, they matter. You've already made a difference, Naomi. This is just another way to keep the ripple going." His words settled over her like a balm, easing some of her apprehension. The next day, the hospital auditorium buzzed with anticipation as staff from across departments filled the seats. Naomi stood backstage, clutching her note cards. She had rehearsed her speech a dozen times, but her nerves still danced in the pit of her stomach. Susan Collins appeared at her side, her presence grounding. "You're going to do great," Susan said. "Just speak from the heart. That's what people connect with." Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath. When the moderator introduced her, she stepped onto the stage to a round of polite applause. The spotlight felt blinding at first, but as Naomi scanned the room, she saw familiar faces: James, Susan, Mr. Donnelly, and his wife, even Clara and Tyler. Their presence filled her with courage. She began her speech, her voice steady but full of emotion. "When I first walked into this hospital, I was excited to start a new chapter. But that excitement was quickly met with challenges. Challenges I hadn't anticipated. Doubts about my abilities, assumptions about my qualifications, and the constant pressure to prove myself over and over again." Naomi paused, letting her words sink in. "But what kept me going were the people. The patients who trusted me, the colleagues who supported me, and the moments of kindness that reminded me why I chose this path. It's those moments that create ripples, small acts that inspire change." She spoke about Tyler, about Ella, and about Mr. Donnelly. She shared the struggles and triumphs that had shaped her journey. "When we listen to each other, when we see each other for who we are, not just as doctors or nurses, but as human beings, we create a better environment for everyone." By the time she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her words palpable. As the audience rose in applause, Naomi felt an overwhelming sense of validation. She had spoken her truth, and it had been heard. After the seminar, a line of people formed to speak with her. Nurses, doctors, and staff members offered words of gratitude and admiration. One young medical resident approached her with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Bennett, Your story meant so much to me. I've felt so alone trying to prove myself, but hearing you today gave me hope." Naomi placed a hand on the resident's shoulder. "You're not alone. Keep pushing forward and don't be afraid to ask for support. You belong here." That evening, Naomi joined James and Susan for a quiet celebration in the rooftop garden. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and the air was filled with a sense of accomplishment. "You were incredible today," Susan said, raising her glass of sparkling water. James nodded. "See, I told you, ripple effects." Naomi laughed softly, a warmth spreading through her chest. "It wasn't just me. It's the people who've supported me like you two. You're part of this journey too." As they clinked their glasses, Naomi felt a deep sense of gratitude. The challenges hadn't disappeared, but she was no longer walking the path alone. That night, Naomi wrote in her journal, "A single voice can create ripples. Together, we can create waves." She closed the journal, her heart full. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she let herself bask in the glow of progress. Naomi woke the next morning with an unshakable sense of clarity. The seminar had been a turning point, not just for her, but for others in the hospital. She could feel it in the way people greeted her in the halls, their smiles warmer, their words more intentional. Something had shifted, and for the first time, Naomi allowed herself to believe she had truly made a difference. The day began with a familiar routine, reviewing patient charts, consulting with colleagues, and managing her growing caseload. Among her patients was Ella, whose treatments had steadily improved her confidence as much as her skin. "Dr. Bennett," Ella called out as Naomi entered the room. She held up a small bracelet woven with colorful beads. "I made this for you," Ella said shyly, handing it over. Naomi smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Ella. I'll treasure it." Ella's mother watched the exchange, her eyes glistening. "You've done more for her than you'll ever know," she said. Naomi nodded, the weight of those words settling in. Later in the afternoon, Naomi attended a staff meeting where Dr. Hargrove made an announcement. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his tone uncharacteristically warm, "the board has reviewed your work over the past months, and it's my pleasure to inform you that you've been promoted to head of dermatology." The room erupted in applause. Naomi's breath caught in her chest. The news was unexpected, though not undeserved. She stood, thanking the team with quiet grace. As she returned to her seat, Susan leaned over with a proud smile. "You've earned this, Naomi." The promotion brought immediate challenges, from navigating administrative duties to managing a team of residents. But Naomi faced these tasks with the same determination that had carried her through every obstacle. One evening, as she organized files in her new office, there was a knock at the door. A young medical student stepped in, her expression nervous yet hopeful. "Dr. Bennett," she began, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hoping you could offer some advice. I'm struggling to find my place here, and, well, your story has been so inspiring." Naomi gestured for the student to sit. She listened intently as the young woman shared her experiences, her doubts, and her fears. "You're not alone," Naomi said finally. "This journey isn't easy, but every challenge you face will shape you into the doctor you're meant to be. And remember, you don't have to do it all on your own. Lean on the people who believe in you." The student smiled, visibly reassured. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett. That means so much." As the student left, Naomi felt a deep sense of purpose. Her struggles had paved the way for others, and now she had the opportunity to guide the next generation. That weekend, Naomi visited her parents in South Carolina. Sitting on the porch of their modest home, she recounted the events of the past months, the challenges, the triumphs, the unexpected kindnesses that had carried her through. Her father leaned back in his chair, a proud smile on his face. "We always knew you'd do great things, Naomi. But more than that, We're proud of the person you've become." Her mother nodded. "You're making a difference, sweetheart. That's what matters most." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat. "I couldn't have done it without you two. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As she drove back to Atlanta, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The whispers of doubt, the barriers of bias, the moments of loneliness, they had all shaped her into the person she was now. When she arrived at her apartment, she placed Ella's bracelet and Tyler's handmade card on her desk. They were small reminders of the lives she had touched, the ripples she had created. That evening, Naomi wrote her final journal entry for the chapter of her life she had just completed. Resilience is not just about surviving challenges, it's about transforming them into opportunities to grow, to connect, and to leave a legacy of kindness and hope. As she closed the journal, she felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was still unwritten, but Naomi knew she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks following Naomi's promotion were some of the busiest of her life, but they were also the most fulfilling. Every morning, she walked into Maple Grove Medical Center with a renewed sense of purpose, her white coat a symbol of her journey. Patients smiled when they saw her, colleagues greeted her with respect, and the young doctors under her guidance began to flourish. One afternoon, as she stepped into the rooftop garden during a rare moment of quiet, James joined her. Looking back, he said, leaning on the railing, "Did you ever think you'd come this far?" Naomi smiled, the city skyline stretching before them. Some days, it felt impossible, but every patient, every act of kindness, it all built something bigger than I ever imagined. James nodded. "You've done more than just succeed, Naomi. You've inspired people. You've created a legacy." She glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Not just me. It's the people who believed in me, people like you." As they stood there, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the city, Naomi felt a profound sense of closure and beginning. Her journey had only just started, but she knew she was ready for what lay ahead. Dr. Naomi Bennett's story reminds us of the power of perseverance, the strength in kindness, and the importance of embracing our purpose. Like Naomi, each of us has the potential to overcome challenges, inspire others, and make a difference. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to join our community and be part of a journey filled with inspiring tales and meaningful lessons. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, hope, and human connection. Together, let's continue to share the ripples that create waves of change. Thank you for reading, and we hope to see you again soon.